Someone interesting, they did ask me what my favourite sort of childhood memory was about playing sport.
The doors are tall, gold-handled, and for 1 second, they do not open. 200 guests wait on the other side, glasses already poured, cutlery already squared against white linen. Inside, at the far end of the room, someone lifts a chair 6 inches to the left. Queen Camilla has just asked for that chair to move. The name card beside it reads, Princess Charlotte. She is 6 years old, standing between adults twice her height, paying no attention to the furniture. Her mother is paying very close attention. Catherine, Princess of Wales, says one word. No, not raised, not repeated. She sets it down the way she might set down a fork. Calm, deliberate, final. For a moment, nobody else in the room moves either. An aide's hand stays flat on the back of the chair. A footman near the door stops mid-step, tray balanced, eyes forward. Even the string quartet playing faintly through the wall seems to hold its next note a little too long. Hi viewers, quick question before we go further. If someone tried to quietly move your child's seat at a family event without asking you first, would you speak up right there in the room or wait and deal with it after? Tell me in the comments, I really want to know. Camilla's expression does not change. That, on its own, tells its own story. In a family where every face is photographed daily, stillness is rarely an accident. William, standing a few feet away, does not step in. He does not need to. His wife has already answered for both of them. Somewhere near the head table, an equerry checks a clipboard twice, as if the paper might rearrange itself back into order. The chair stays where it was. Charlotte's name stays where it was. The story most people will repeat tomorrow is the small one. 2 women disagreed over a seat. A queen asked. A princess said no. That story is easy to tell and easy to forget by next week. The other story does not go away that quickly. It is the story of who decides where the next generation sits, literally and otherwise, in a family always watched and always measured against the family it used to be. Nobody in that dining room raised their voice tonight, but something shifted anyway. And the people paying the closest attention were not looking at Camilla, or even at Catherine. They were looking at the empty 6 inches of space the chair had almost moved into, wondering exactly whose idea it really was. A single place card can end a week of good publicity in the time it takes a photographer to raise a camera. That is not an exaggeration inside Buckingham Palace. It is basic arithmetic. Royal seating is never left to chance. Long before a state banquet begins, protocol officers spend well over a year mapping who sits where, who sits beside whom, and who sits within camera range of the head table. According to the official website of the British Monarchy, preparation for a state banquet starts more than a year ahead of the visiting head of state's arrival, and the final table setting is only locked in roughly 5 days before the guests walk through the door. 5 days. For one dinner. That is how much precision goes into a single evening. Most people watch for 20 minutes on the news and forget by morning. Every name card is placed with intention. Every distance between 2 chairs is a small, deliberate statement about closeness, trust, or distance. Nothing on that table is left to instinct, and nothing is added or removed without someone, somewhere, signing off on it first. So, when a seat moves at the last minute, it is rarely about the seat itself. It is about what the seat represents. Think of it the way Americans think of a White House state dinner. Where a guest sits tells you how close they are to power, how trusted they are, how visible the host wants them to be that night. Move a name card in Washington, and reporters ask questions for a week. Move one inside Buckingham Palace, and royal historians write about it for decades. That is the frame worth holding on to here. Nobody outside the palace has confirmed exactly what request Camilla made, or why. This version of the story, now spreading across royal commentary channels and social media, should be treated as exactly that. A story people are telling, not a confirmed palace record. But stories still reveal what people believe about power, even when every detail is not locked down. And what this one reveals is simple. People believe Catherine is now willing to say no. Not to a stranger, not to a stylist or an event planner, to the Queen. If that detail holds up in any form, it says less about bad blood between 2 women and more about a shift already underway inside the family. One where the mother of the next generation has started drawing her own lines. A seating chart, of all places, is where the line got drawn first. Here is a fact that never makes it into the seating gossip, but should. Princess Charlotte is not just a child at a dinner table. She is living proof that an old law was rewritten specifically so a daughter like her would never be pushed down the list by a younger brother.
Before 2013, a royal daughter could be born first, raised for years as the presumed future monarch, and then lose that place the moment a younger brother arrived. That is not folklore. That is exactly what the old rule of male preference succession allowed for centuries. The Succession to the Crown Act 2013 ended that rule for anyone born after the 28th of October, 2011, according to the official record kept on the royal family's own website. Birth order now decides the line to the throne. Gender no longer does. Princess Charlotte was born in 2015, 4 years after that cut-off date. That single fact fixes her position permanently. She stands behind her father, William, Prince of Wales, and behind her older brother, Prince George. She stands ahead of her younger brother, Prince Louis, by law, regardless of anything else that ever happens inside that family. So when people talk about Charlotte's seat at a banquet as though it were only a child's chair, they are missing what her name carries into that room. She is a living example of a modern rule change, seated inside an institution still built mostly on old rules. That contrast is exactly where the tension lives. An institution shaped by centuries of hierarchy now has, at its centre, a young girl who represents the moment hierarchy had to change to stay credible. Cameras find Charlotte at every formal event, not because she outranks her brothers in age, but because she represents something the monarchy had no choice but to update. Royal commentators have noted for years that Charlotte draws a particular kind of public attention, different from the attention paid to her brothers. Not louder, steadier. The kind reserved for someone people already suspect will matter more than her current age suggests. Catherine, whatever her private reasons actually were that evening, is raising a daughter who carries that weight every time she steps into a formal room. A seating change, for a mother who understands that, is never only about one dinner. It is about what her daughter learns, this year and every year after, about where she is allowed to stand and who gets to decide it for her. If the palace can quietly adjust Charlotte's position once, without her mother's agreement, the precedent stops being about a chair at all. It becomes about whether anyone outside her own parents gets a vote in how she is seen. Queen Camilla did not become one of the most photographed women in Britain by accident. She became that by surviving nearly 3 decades of public judgment that would have ended most careers, royal or otherwise. That history matters here, because it explains a version of her side of this story that rarely gets told with much patience. By the time Camilla married King Charles III in 2005, she had already spent years absorbing criticism most people never fully recover from. She learned, out of necessity, how a single image, a single seat, a single expression caught on camera can undo months of careful public rebuilding. If she did ask for a change near Princess Charlotte's place at that table, royal commentators who study palace optics point to a less dramatic explanation than betrayal. A state banquet exists first and foremost to centre the reigning monarch. That is King Charles III's evening by design, not William's, not Catherine's, and not their children's. 3 young, camera-ready grandchildren sitting in clear sightlines can quietly pull attention away from that purpose, whether anyone intends it or not. Photographers rarely choose the most senior royal in frame, they choose the most interesting one. From that angle, protecting the King's evening is not really about diminishing Charlotte at all. It is about managing where the story of the night is allowed to land. That reading deserves real consideration. It is fair. It is not cruel. Public commentary on Camilla's approach to royal life has, over time, described her as someone deeply practical, someone who prizes calm continuity over spectacle. If that read is accurate, then a request to soften Charlotte's visibility on one particular night would fit a pattern of protecting the institution's image above any single family member's spotlight, including her own stepson's children. But it carries a risk nobody in that room may have fully weighed. Managing visibility for one generation almost always means limiting it for another. And the generation being limited here is not made up of aides or courtiers who understand these palace trade-offs by profession. It is a 6-year-old girl who has no say in any of it. Camilla may have been protecting a system she has spent 2 decades learning to survive inside. That instinct is human and arguably earned through experience. Catherine may have been protecting a child who has not yet been asked whether she wants to survive inside that same system at all. Neither motive requires the other woman to be the villain of this story. But only one of them was standing at that table that night, watching a chair get lifted 6 inches without anyone asking her first. Catherine does not raise her voice. She has never needed to, and this was not the night to start. What she does instead is smaller and far more effective. She steps toward the chair before the aide finishes lifting it, rests her hand lightly on the back of it, and waits. Nobody in the room needs a translation for what that gesture means. It stays there. For a woman who spent over a decade being measured against every unofficial rule of palace behaviour before she ever carried the title Princess of Wales, that kind of quiet control is not new. It is close to instinct by now. Catherine's public composure has been documented across more than 15 years of royal engagements, hospital visits, and overseas tours, often praised for staying measured under exactly the kind of scrutiny that would unravel most people. That composure has not gone anywhere tonight. It is simply aimed at something specific, for the first time in public view, her own child's place in the room. She does not appeal to King Charles III. She does not look toward William for backup. She does not ask Camilla to explain herself in front of 200 witnesses. She simply does not move her hand. An aide glances toward a more senior official near the doorway. The official gives no visible signal back. Whatever chain of approval usually governs a change like this seems to run straight into Catherine standing still and stop there. The chair does not move again that evening. What makes this moment matter is not the size of the gesture. It is what the gesture answers quietly in front of a room full of people who will each describe it differently by morning. For generations, palace protocol has flowed in one direction, downward from the reigning household to the next in line, who are expected to adapt, absorb, and comply without complaint. That is not opinion. It is how court hierarchy has functioned for as long as the institution has existed in its modern form. Catherine's stillness that night suggests at minimum that the flow is no longer purely one direction. She is not defying the king. She is not confronting the queen. She is simply refusing to let her daughter's place in a room be decided without her, inside a family where that kind of refusal has rarely been visible in public before. Whether this moment becomes a genuine turning point or a single evening nobody repeats depends on what happens next. Inside a family that has learned, better than almost any other institution on earth, how to control which version of events the public ever gets to see. But one thing had already changed at that table, whether the palace ever confirms a word of it or not. Someone said no, and the room let her. Across the table, one man says nothing at all. William, Prince of Wales, does not lean forward. He does not catch his wife's eye for permission, and he does not glance toward his father for guidance. He keeps eating, unhurried, as if the chair behind him had never moved 6 inches and back again. That stillness is not an accident, and inside a family built on decades of image control, silence is rarely empty. For years, royal watchers have noted a pattern in how William handles moments of tension involving Catherine. He rarely steps in publicly. He lets her handle it, then stands beside her afterward, present but not performing. Some commentators read that pattern as distance. A more careful reading suggests something closer to trust. In a marriage built inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth, letting your wife hold her ground in front of 200 guests without rescuing her and without overshadowing her, is its own kind of statement. It says she does not need him to speak for her. It also says something larger about where power inside the monarchy is actually moving, and how slowly that shift usually gets acknowledged in public. King Charles III sits at the head of that table tonight, and by every formal measure still holds the crown. But William and Catherine already represent something the palace itself has spent years building toward in public.
A lot of food as well. Yeah, so
How much do I put in?
no, that's fine. We send so throughout Ramadan, one more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The next reigning household, the faces most likely to define what the monarchy looks like for the next 50 years. Their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, are not incidental to that plan. They are the plan, and every public appearance the 3 of them make is quietly measured against that fact, by aides who rarely speak about it out loud. So when a seat near Charlotte gets challenged, and William lets his wife answer without stepping between them, he is not staying neutral. He is allowing the future court to speak for itself, in its own voice, in a setting this formal, for what may be the first time. That is not weakness. Inside a family fluent in symbolism, it may be closer to a signal. The old court still holds the title tonight. King Charles III remains the sovereign, the host, the reason 200 guests are seated in that room at all. But something else became visible at that table, something harder to undo once it has been seen in front of witnesses. The next generation did not simply survive the evening, it answered for itself, and nobody at that table stopped it. The next morning, the photographs look exactly like they always do. Catherine smiles for the cameras outside the palace gates. Camilla waves from a passing car. William shakes hands down a rope line unhurried at ease. Nothing in a single image from that morning hints at a chair moved 6 inches the night before. That is the part people miss when they study royal life only through official photographs. Unity, performed well enough, looks identical whether it is real or simply required. Institutions rarely show more polish than in the exact moments they are under the most internal strain. A united front is not evidence that nothing happened behind it. Sometimes it is the opposite. The more coordinated the smiles look, the more coordination it likely took to produce them. Inside that coordination is a 6-year-old girl learning what her family expects of her in public, one carefully staged appearance at a time. Princess Charlotte has already appeared at major national moments most adults never experience even once, including standing beside her family at her great-grandmother's funeral in September 2022, a moment captured by cameras from nearly every angle available. She was 7 years old. She stood still, hands folded, for the length of an entire state funeral. That kind of composure is not typically asked of a child, it is asked of a working royal, and Charlotte, whether anyone says the word out loud yet, is already being raised as one, appearance by appearance year after year, long before she has any real choice in the matter. A seating dispute over her place at a dinner table might look small next to a state funeral, but both moments teach the same lesson repeatedly. Her position in the room is never entirely her own decision, or her parents alone. It belongs in some measure to an institution that existed long before she was born, and expects to outlast everyone currently seated at that table. That is not cruelty. It is simply how monarchy has always operated, generation after generation, long before Charlotte's name ever appeared on a place card. But knowing that does not make it painless to watch. And here is where the story bends in a direction few people expected when this all started. If the goal that evening truly was to quiet Charlotte's presence, to make the room's attention land somewhere else, the opposite happened. Every retelling of that dinner, every commentary video, every social post arguing over who was right, put her name at the centre of the conversation instead of at the edge of it. The attempt to make her smaller appears, so far, to have made her impossible to look away from. Turn the board around and the whole picture changes. If the purpose behind moving Charlotte's chair was ever to lower the temperature on her, to keep the evening's spotlight fixed on King Charles III and Queen Camilla, then the plan produced the exact opposite result within 24 hours. Chatter about Princess Charlotte spiked. Commentary channels that normally cover royal fashion or public appearances pivoted overnight to questions about succession, protocol and family hierarchy. A 7-year-old's dinner seat became a national conversation about who actually controls the monarchy's future image. That is the part worth sitting with. In royal politics, the move meant to stay quiet is very often the exact move that gets studied the loudest. Here is the position as it stood by the next morning. Camilla's alleged goal, according to the version of events now circulating, was reduced visibility for the Wales children at that particular event. Catherine's countermove was simple physical presence, a hand on a chair, nothing more. The public result was neither reduced visibility nor quiet continuity. It was the opposite of both. Charlotte became, for one news cycle at least, the single most discussed young royal in the family. Some viewers watching this story unfold will side with Catherine, framing her as a mother protecting her daughter's dignity in a room built to diminish her. Others will side with Camilla, framing the request, if it happened at all, as ordinary event management rather than personal targeting. Both readings are reasonable. Neither one requires dishonesty to hold, and both say something true about how differently people are willing to read the exact same 6 inches of movement. But the board itself does not care which reading feels more satisfying. It only registers what actually happened once the pieces moved. And what happened is this: an attempt to shrink attention around one child expanded it instead, permanently, in a way no palace statement has been able to undo since. That is the real cost of trying to manage image inside a family this visible. Every move gets seen eventually. Every quiet request risks becoming the loudest story of the week once it leaves the room it was made in, and no amount of careful planning can fully account for that once the doors open to the public. By the next evening, the banquet itself had already stopped being the story people were discussing. The real story had shifted entirely. It was no longer about who sat where. It had become a question about who, inside one of the oldest institutions on Earth, actually gets to decide what the future of that institution is allowed to look like. Strip away the chair, the table, and the dinner itself, and a different argument comes into view. This was never really Catherine against Camilla. Two women who, by most public accounts, have maintained a working, cordial relationship for years, were never the true opposing sides of this particular board. The real conflict sits one level deeper. It is the old model of monarchy against the model already replacing it in slow motion. It is a present reign, built around King Charles III and Queen Camilla, standing next to a future reign already forming around William, Catherine, and their 3 children. It is managed hierarchy, the kind that quietly reshuffles a room to protect an image, running into public trust, the kind that only survives when people believe the family behaves the way it says it does. It is tradition, which moves slowly by design, standing across from visibility, which moves at the speed of a smartphone camera. None of that requires villains. It requires an institution old enough to remember when a daughter could be quietly moved down a line of succession by nothing more than the birth of a younger brother, now trying to operate inside a culture that would not tolerate that kind of quiet demotion for even one evening, let alone a lifetime. The succession to the Crown Act of 2013 did not just change a law, it changed an expectation. The public was told, formally, that daughters count the same as sons going forward. Princess Charlotte is the clearest living proof that promise was kept. So when any version of this story suggests she was nearly moved aside, quietly, without her mother's agreement, it does not only touch one dinner, it touches the credibility of that entire promise. That is why the moral weight of this story outlasts the seating chart that started it. The crown does not survive only through laws, ceremonies, and carefully worded statements. It survives through public belief that the institution treats its youngest members with the same care it demands the public show toward the institution itself, year after year, generation after generation. If people believe, even briefly, that an older generation tried to diminish a young girl to protect its own spotlight, the damage done is not to a place card. It is to trust the one resource a modern monarchy cannot simply reprint. And by the time that dinner ended, one thing had become unusually clear. The most powerful figure in the entire story may not have been the one wearing the crown that night. The chair sits exactly where it started, and by the next state occasion, almost no one watching from home will remember it moved at all. That is how most royal stories actually end. Not with a scandal confirmed on the record, but with a single evening slowly folded back into the ordinary rhythm of palace life. Photographed, discussed for a week, then quietly filed away. But something about that evening did not fully fold away, and it is worth naming plainly before this story closes. Everyone who watched or read about it focused on the refusal. The Queen asked, a princess said no, and that single exchange became the headline version repeated across every retelling, shared and reshared until the details started to blur together. The real story was always the board underneath it. Catherine's response that night, whatever her private reasoning actually was, has become something larger in how it gets remembered. A mother drawing a clear line, a future queen protecting the next generation before that generation was old enough to protect itself, and a modern monarchy being quietly reminded that a 2013 law changed more than a line of succession on paper. It changed what the public now expects that institution to protect in practice publicly, in front of witnesses, without excuses offered afterward.
Princess Charlotte will likely have no memory of this particular evening by the time she is old enough to understand why people still discuss it. But the pattern set that night, if any part of it holds up, matters regardless of what she remembers personally. Daughters in this family are no longer background figures, arranged quietly around whoever the room happens to center that year. There is no dramatic ending here, and there does not need to be one. Power inside an institution like this rarely announces itself with noise, fireworks, or public declarations. Most of the time, it looks like a hand resting quietly on the back of a chair and simply staying there until the room understands. That single, undramatic gesture may end up outlasting every headline written about it this week, because in the end, this was never only about where a 6-year-old sits at one formal dinner. It was about something far larger and far more permanent than a chair. It was about whether the future of the crown can still be moved without a fight.